Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive.
Always.
Today, we're tackling digital storytelling.
Ah, yes. A world full of possibilities.
Absolutely. We're going to unpack how to craft a script that really grabs the audience, visually plan it out, and even navigate those tricky image copyright issues.
Sounds comprehensive.
We've got some great sources to guide us.
Excellent.
Before we get lost in the details, though, why don't we set the scene a bit? Digital storytelling has become such a popular way to communicate.
Oh, absolutely. It's everywhere now, from classrooms to, even corporate boardrooms.
It's pretty amazing to see how it's evolved.
Definitely.
But the great thing is, you don't need to be a Hollywood director to do it well.
Right, right.
Our sources actually break the process down into steps anyone can follow.
That's reassuring.
It is. One of the sources we have is an article called 8 Steps to Great Digital Storytelling.
I'm familiar with that one. It's a great resource.
It is. So should we jump right into those 8 steps?
Let's do it.
Okay, so step 1 focuses on hooking your audience right from the start.
The all-important introduction.
Exactly. What are some ways to create an introduction that makes someone want to keep watching?
Well, you have to remember, you've only got a few seconds to make a first impression, so you need to grab their attention quickly.
Okay, so how do you do that?
You could try piquing their curiosity,
Okay.
maybe introduce a problem or a conflict right away.
Gotcha.
Or you could even start with a strong image, something that sets the tone for the whole story.
So no long, drawn-out intros where you explain everything up front?
No, no, no. Think about how movies start.
Yeah.
They draw you in with those opening scenes.
Makes sense. Create some intrigue?
Exactly. Set the stage for the journey you're about to take them on.
Okay, so we've hooked our audience. Now what about the characters?
Ah, yes. The heart of any good story.
We need to bring them to life. What's important to remember when we're doing that?
Well, you want to make sure they have depth.
Depth.
Yeah. We need to understand why they do, what their flaws are, what their dreams are.
Okay, so we're not just describing what they look like.
Oh, no. We're giving them a voice that feels real, relatable.
It's almost like we're puppet masters, breathing life into these digital characters.
Exactly. One of the sources actually uses an example, I think it was a digital story called Kindertransport.
Oh, right.
And it's a historical story, but they tell it through the eyes of this young girl, which makes it so much more personal and emotionally engaging.
Wow. Yeah, the way we create those characters can really make or break the story's emotional impact.
Absolutely.
Okay, so moving on. The 8 Steps article also talks about building tension.
Ah, yes. That's essential for keeping the audience engaged.
But why is it so important?
Yeah.
And how do we even do that?
Well, think about those movies that keep you on the edge of your seat. That's tension at work.
Yeah.
You introduce conflict, challenges, obstacles that your characters have to overcome.
Okay. It makes the audience wonder what's going to happen next.
Exactly. They're invested in the outcome.
So we need to throw some curveballs at our characters, huh?
Yes. Give them something to struggle against.
Like a mountain to climb or a puzzle to solve.
Precisely.
Okay. And of course, after all that tension, we need some kind of resolution.
Of course. That's where you tie up all the loose ends, give the audience a sense of closure.
Does the resolution always have to be a happy one, though?
That's a good question.
Or can you leave some questions unanswered? Like, an open ending that lets the audience think for themselves.
It really depends on the story you're telling.
Right.
Some stories lend themselves to those neat, tidy endings, while others might benefit from a more ambiguous resolution that encourages, discussion and reflection.
Okay, so we've got our script. Now, how do we bring it to life visually?
That's where storyboarding comes in.
Storyboarding. So what exactly is that?
It's basically a visual plan for your story. You map out each scene shot by shot, kind of like a comic strip.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. But do you need to be a great artist to do it?
Not at all. It's more about planning the flow of your story, making sure each visual piece contributes to the overall message.
I see.
You don't need to be a master illustrator.
It's good to know. I love how some of the sources actually show us examples of storyboards.
Oh, yes. Those are helpful.
Like there's one called Pop-Ups with these really bright, playful illustrations.
Right.
And then there's another one, Bass Country, that has this really cinematic feel, like a movie, with dramatic lighting and composition.
Yeah, it's amazing how different storyboarding styles can create different moods and emotions.
It's true.
Yeah.
And that's what's so great about storyboarding. It can be adapted to any kind of story you want to tell.
It really is a universal language for visual storytelling.
Okay, so we have a script, we have our storyboard, but what about the actual images we use? How do we find the right ones? And what about all the copyright stuff?
That's a great question. And you're right, copyright is something you need to be aware of.
You can be a bit of a minefield.
You can't just grab any image you find online and use it.
Right.
Those images are protected by copyright laws.
So how do we find images that are okay to use legally and ethically?
Well, one of the sources talks about Creative Commons. Have you heard of that?
Vaguely.
It's a system where creators can choose to license their work with different permissions.
Oh, so people are giving permission to use their work.
Exactly. And you can search specifically for images with Creative Commons licenses.
So I could find an image I like, and the creator might say, hey, you can use this for commercial purposes. Or you can even adapt it, change it a little bit.
Exactly. Sometimes they'll just ask for attribution, which means you credit them as the creator.
Okay, so Creative Commons sounds like a great resource.
Yeah.
What about photos we take ourselves with a camera? Are there any copyright issues with those?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Generally, the images you create are considered your intellectual property.
So I own the copyright.
Right. But there are a few things to keep in mind. Well, let's say you're taking photos in public. You might accidentally capture other people in your shot. Oh. In some cases, you might need their permission to use their image, especially if you're sharing your story commercially.
So even with our own photos, there can be some legal things to consider.
Yes. It's always good to be aware of those.
Okay, and what about image quality? I remember something in our sources about resolution.
Ah, yes. Resolution is important.
Why is that?
Well, resolution refers to the number of pixels in an image. Higher resolution means more pixels, and that means you can enlarge the image without it getting blurry or pixelated.
Oh, so that's why sometimes when I download images from the internet, they look terrible when I try to use them.
Exactly. They're probably low resolution.
So high-resolution images are a must if we want our digital stories to look professional.
Absolutely. You want those visuals to be crisp and clear, especially if you're showing your story on a big screen.
Makes sense. Any other technical tips we should keep in mind?
Let me think. The source material also mentions choosing the right software for making your storyboard.
Oh, right. There are so many options out there.
There are. Some are super simple, like pen and paper.
Yeah, I can handle that.
But there are also sophisticated digital platforms. It really comes down to your personal preference and, how comfortable you are with technology.
I guess some research is in order then.
Definitely. The source suggests checking out some popular options and seeing what features appeal to you. Some have templates or pre-made graphics, while others give you more creative control.
It sounds like there's something for everyone.
There really is. And speaking of challenges, the source material also talks about some common roadblocks people hit during the storyboarding process.
Oh, like what?
Well, sometimes people get stuck figuring out how to translate their script into a visual sequence.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So deciding how to break down your story into individual shots.
Exactly. And then figuring out what kinds of imagery will convey the right mood and message for each scene.
That makes sense. Like, should I use a close-up to show how a character is feeling, or a wide shot to establish the setting? Those kinds of decisions.
Exactly. Those can be tough.
What else?
Well, even with resources like Creative Commons, sometimes finding the perfect images for your story can take time.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
And you want to make sure the style of those images is consistent throughout.
Absolutely. You don't want it to look like a jumbled mess.
So visual consistency is key.
It is. But the source offers some helpful tips for overcoming these obstacles.
Oh, good. Like what?
They recommend starting with a rough sketch of your storyboard just to get your ideas down. Don't worry about making it perfect at first.
So start rough and then refine it later.
Exactly. And another big tip is to get feedback from others. Share your storyboard with people and see what they think.
Oh, that's a good idea. A fresh perspective can be really helpful.
It can. They might spot things you've missed.
Okay, so we've talked about the script, the storyboard, the visuals. But why should our listeners care about all this?
That's a great question.
What's the big takeaway here? What makes digital storytelling so valuable?
Well, one of the things that's really fascinating to me is how digital storytelling can actually improve both teaching and learning.
Oh, how so?
Well, think about it. A well-made digital story can bring a subject to life in a way that a textbook just can't.
I see what you mean.
It engages students on an emotional level, making the learning experience more memorable, more impactful.
It's like instead of just reading about a historical event, you're watching a documentary that immerses you in that time period.
Exactly. And it's not just limited to history. Digital storytelling can be applied to any subject, from science and math to literature and art.
Right, right.
It's a really powerful way to make information stick.
And it's not just for students either, right? I can see how businesses could use it for training or to share research findings, or even just for personal storytelling.
Absolutely. The possibilities are truly endless.
So instead of just passively absorbing information, digital storytelling allows us to become creators, communicators.
Exactly. And that's a skill that's only becoming more and more valuable in today's world.
Well, I'm feeling inspired, but before we all run off to become the next Spielberg, we need to talk about something crucial: using images responsibly.
Ah, yes. Navigating copyright.
It can be a tricky area.
It can be, but it's important to understand the rules of the game.
So let's break it down. What is copyright and why should we care?
Well, copyright is a legal right that protects creators of original work, and that includes images, music, even text.
So you can't just use other people's creative work without their permission.
Exactly. It's about respecting the effort and creativity that goes into making these things.
So Creative Commons is one way to find images we can use. What are some other options?
You could purchase images from stock photo websites.
Oh, right, those exist.
They have huge libraries of high-quality images, and you pay a fee to license them.
That makes sense. But what if you're on a tight budget?
That's where Creative Commons really shines. As we talked about, creators choose to make their work available under specific licenses, some of which are free.
So it's a goldmine for budget-conscious storytellers.
Yeah.
But we still have to pay close attention to the license terms for each image.
Absolutely. Not all Creative Commons licenses are the same. Some require you to credit the creator, and some might limit how you can modify the image.
Okay, so we need to do our homework. What about educational fair use? Can we rely on that?
Well, educational fair use allows for some use of copyrighted material for educational purposes.
Ah, so there are some exceptions.
Yes, but it's a bit of a gray area. There are some general guidelines.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. The main purpose of using the material should be educational, and you should only use as much as you need to achieve that educational purpose.
So I can't just use an entire movie in my digital story and call it educational.
Exactly. And your use of the material shouldn't hurt the market for the original work.
Okay, so educational fair use can be helpful, but we need to be responsible.
Always err on the side of caution when it comes to copyright. If you're unsure, reach out to the copyright holder and ask for permission.
Good advice. Are there any other options for sourcing images?
You could look for public domain images.
Public domain.
These are images that aren't protected by copyright anymore.
So they're free to use for anything.
Pretty much. But it's always wise to double-check the copyright status, just to be safe.
Okay, good to know. And just to clarify, what about images we take ourselves? Any copyright issues there?
As we mentioned before, images you create are generally considered your own intellectual property.
Right, I own the copyright.
Yeah.
But you said there were some things to keep in mind.
Yes, especially if you're taking photos in public.
Because other people might be in my shots.
Exactly. You might need their permission to use their likeness, especially if you plan to use your story commercially.
So even with our own photos, we need to be mindful of those things.
That's absolutely.
Okay, and I remember we talked about resolution earlier. Why is that so important for our images?
Well, resolution is all about the number of pixels an image has. Higher resolution means you can enlarge the image without losing quality. It'll stay sharp and clear.
So that's why those low-resolution images from the internet look bad when you try to use them in a presentation.
Exactly. They just don't have enough detail.
Makes sense. So high-resolution images are a must for professional-looking digital stories.
Absolutely. Especially if you're showing it on a large screen, you want the visuals to be crisp.
Okay, any other technical tips to keep in mind?
Let's see. Yes. The file format of your images is important too.
File format. I thought a picture was a picture.
Well, not all image files are created equal. Different formats have different strengths and weaknesses.
Oh, interesting. So what are the most common formats?
You'll probably encounter JPEGs, PNGs, and GIFs most often.
Okay, I've heard of those.
JPEGs are great for photos and images with lots of colors. They use compression to reduce file size, but that can sometimes mean a little loss in quality.
So JPEGs are a trade-off between file size and image quality.
Exactly. PNGs, on the other hand, are lossless.
Lossless.
Yeah, they keep all the image data, so they're better for things with sharp lines and text, like logos or graphics.
If I want to keep those crisp details, PNGs are the way to go.
Precisely. And then you have GIFs, which are best for simple animations and graphics with limited colors.
Like those funny memes and animated GIFs we see all over the internet.
Exactly. So when you're picking a file format, think about what kind of images you're using and what level of quality you need.
Okay, so JPEGs for photos, PNGs for graphics, GIFs for animations. Got it. Anything else?
One more thing. You should optimize your images for web use.
Optimize. What does that mean?
It means making the file size smaller without sacrificing too much quality.
Why is that important?
Well, large image files can slow down your digital story's loading time, and that can be frustrating for viewers.
So it's about making sure the viewing experience is smooth. How do we do that?
You can resize your images to the dimensions you'll be using in your story.
So if it's just going to be a small thumbnail, I don't need to use a huge high-resolution image.
Exactly. You can also use image compression tools. They help reduce file size without losing too much quality.
So resizing and compression are our friends when it comes to optimization.
They are. And while we're talking about making things look good, we should mention the overall aesthetics of your digital story.
Aesthetics, you mean like how it looks?
Exactly. Things like the color palette, font choices, the visual style, all of those contribute to the story's emotional impact.
So it's like creating a world that draws the audience in and makes them feel something specific.
Exactly. Aesthetics are powerful. They can evoke wonder, create intimacy, even heighten the drama.
So it's not just about slapping together some images and text.
Right. You need to think about the overall look and feel, how you want the audience to experience the story.
So we need to channel our inner designers. Any tips for choosing a color palette that actually helps tell the story?
One approach is to use colors that evoke the emotions you're trying to convey.
Like warm colors for happiness and cool colors for sadness.
Exactly. Or you could use complementary colors to create visual interest and contrast.
And what about fonts? Any guidelines for choosing those?
I'd say stick to 2 or 3 fonts at most.
So, no font parties in our digital stories.
Right. Too many fonts can be distracting. Pick fonts that are easy to read and complement the style of your story.
Simple and stylish, got it. Any other tips for visual appeal?
Don't be afraid to use white space.
White space, you mean like blank space?
Exactly. It's the empty space around the elements in your story.
So like giving the visuals room to breathe.
Precisely. It improves readability and makes the whole thing more visually appealing.
Okay, so embrace the power of blank space. Any other design tips?
One last one. Visual hierarchy.
Visual hierarchy, what's that?
It's about arranging the elements so the viewer's eye is drawn to the most important information first. You use size, color, and placement to guide their attention.
Oh, like creating a roadmap for the viewer.
Exactly. It helps your story flow more naturally.
I think we've covered a lot about visuals. From sourcing images to file formats to optimizing for the web and even using white space effectively.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. But before we move on, I want to go back to the heart of digital storytelling. Crafting those narratives that truly resonate with viewers.
Ah, yes. The story itself. The foundation.
Right. Let's revisit those 8 steps to great digital storytelling and see how we can use them to create a truly captivating narrative.
Sounds good.
We talked about hooking the audience right from the start.
That crucial first step.
Exactly. We need that attention grabber.
Hmm.
What are some ways to create an irresistible introduction?
You could start with a question.
A question.
Yes. Something that makes them curious, challenges what they think they know, or just makes them want to know the answer.
Oh, I see. Like, what if everything you thought about topic was wrong?
Exactly. Questions engage the audience's minds. They become active participants in the story.
I've also seen people start with a bold statement, something that really makes you take notice.
That's a good one, too. A statement that challenges conventional wisdom maybe reveals a surprising statistic.
So something like, the future of industry is not what you think.
Exactly. It grabs their attention and establishes your authority on the topic.
Okay, and then there's the classic storytelling technique of starting with a captivating anecdote.
Anecdotes are great. They connect with us emotionally, letting us see the human side of things.
So like, I used to believe belief, but then something happened that changed everything.
Exactly. You draw the audience into your world, make them feel invested in the story.
So we've got questions, bold statements, anecdotes.
Yeah.
Any other ideas for those attention-grabbing introductions?
Don't forget about starting with a powerful visual. A striking image, a video clip, even a simple animation.
Oh, right. It's like creating an immediate emotional connection before you even say a word.
Exactly. Visuals are processed much faster than text, so they can be really effective for grabbing attention and setting the tone.
Okay, so we've got our arsenal of attention-grabbing techniques. Now, what about introducing our characters? How do we bring them to life in this digital world?
Well, the most important thing is to make them relatable.
Relatable.
Yeah, we want the audience to connect with them on an emotional level, to see themselves in these characters, to feel what they feel.
So even if our characters are fictional, they need to feel real.
Absolutely. Relatable characters are what make us care about a story. We root for them, we empathize with them.
So how do we make them relatable? What are some things we can do?
Give them flaws.
Flaws. Why would we want to do that?
Think about it. Perfect characters are boring.
That's true.
We need to see characters who make mistakes, who struggle, who maybe make choices we don't agree with.
Oh, I see what you mean. It makes them feel more human.
Exactly. Flaws add depth and complexity, making them more interesting and engaging for the audience.
What else can we do?
Give them a strong voice.
Voice.
Yeah, a unique way of speaking, a set of values, a perspective that sets them apart.
Okay, so it's not just what they say, it's how they say it. Their personality shines through.
Exactly. That's what makes characters memorable. We start to hear their thoughts, understand why they do what they do, connect with them on a deeper level.
And how do we develop that strong voice?
Think about their background, their experiences, what has shaped their view of the world, what do they believe in, what kind of language do they use.
So even if we don't explicitly tell their whole life story, it's helpful to create a backstory for them.
Absolutely. A good backstory can inform every aspect of their voice, from their dialogue to their actions.
And of course, we need to give them motivations. Why are they doing what they're doing?
Yes, motivations drive their actions. Without them, they can seem aimless or confusing to the audience.
So it's about giving them a purpose in the story.
Exactly. It adds depth and makes them more believable.
And those motivations can change over time, right?
Of course. As characters encounter obstacles and challenges, their motivations might shift, maybe leading to new goals and unexpected twists.
So relatable characters are key. We need to give them flaws, a voice, motivations, anything else to bring them to life.
Show them in action.
What do you mean?
Don't just tell us about them. Show us who they are through their words, their actions, how they interact with others.
Oh, I see. Create scenes that let their personalities shine through.
Exactly. Action moves the story forward. It keeps the audience engaged and invested in the characters.
And those actions can be big or small, right? It's not always about grand gestures. Sometimes it's those subtle moments, the quiet things, that reveal the most.
Absolutely. It's those details that make them feel real.
Okay, we've talked a lot about characters. Any final tips for making them unforgettable?
Don't be afraid to surprise the audience. Create characters who defy expectations.
Oh, I like that. Keep us guessing.
Exactly. Surprise keeps things interesting. It creates suspense and can lead to those unexpected emotional payoffs.
All right, so we've covered a lot about crafting characters. But a great story isn't just about interesting individuals, right? It's about their relationships.
You're absolutely right. Relationships are the heart of any good story.
They drive the narrative forward. So how do we make those relationships compelling? What are some key things to consider?
First and foremost, they need to feel authentic.
Authentic, like real.
Exactly. We want relationships that feel grounded in real-world dynamics.
Something the audience can relate to.
Exactly. Because if the relationships feel real, the audience can invest in the story on an emotional level.
So how do we create that authenticity?
Well, you can start by establishing clear roles and dynamics within the relationship.
Roles and dynamics, what do you mean?
Like, who has the power in the relationship?
Right.
Who's the leader? Who's the follower? What are their unspoken rules?
Oh, I see. So we're creating a framework, a set of expectations for how they interact.
Exactly. And then, as the story unfolds, we can disrupt that framework, create tension.
I was just going to say, we need some conflict in those relationships. No relationship is perfect.
Exactly. Conflict is what drives the story. It creates challenges for the characters, forces them to make tough choices, and leads to growth and transformation.
So even though we love our characters, we need to be willing to make them suffer a bit.
In a way, yes. Conflict makes those relationships dynamic and interesting.
And we need to show how the relationship changes over time, right?
Absolutely. Relationships aren't static. They evolve as characters experience new things and learn from each other.
So it's not just about showing the initial spark or the first fight. It's about how they work through those challenges.
Exactly. Growth and change are what make relationships compelling.
Okay, so we've got roles, conflict, evolution. Any other tips for crafting those relationships?
Don't be afraid to explore the full range of human emotions.
So, love, hate, anger, jealousy, forgiveness, the whole shebang.
The whole shebang. Human relationships are complex, and our digital stories should reflect that.
No sugarcoating.
Right. Embrace the messy reality, and your relationships will be more believable and impactful.
We've talked a lot about narratives and characters, but a great digital story is more than just words. It's about bringing those elements to life visually.
Absolutely. Visual storytelling is a powerful tool.
So, what are some key principles to keep in mind?
The most important one is to use visuals that complement the narrative, not distract from it.
So, no random images or fancy effects that don't serve a purpose.
Exactly. Our visuals should work with the story, help set the scene, introduce characters, convey emotions, illustrate key points, and keep things moving.
And I've noticed that it's helpful to use a variety of visual elements to keep the audience engaged.
Variety is key. It keeps things interesting.
We can use images, video clips, animations, graphics, even interactive elements.
Exactly. The possibilities are endless. It's about creating a rich and immersive experience for the viewer.
And we need to pay attention to the overall look and feel of our digital story, right?
Absolutely. The aesthetics play a huge role in the emotional impact.
So it's not just about choosing pretty pictures, it's about using visuals strategically to enhance the narrative.
You got it. A well-crafted visual style can elevate a good story to a great one.
Okay, so we've covered some key principles. Let's get practical. What are some specific techniques we can use to bring our stories to life visually?
One really effective technique is using close-up shots.
Close-ups, like zooming in on a character's face to show their emotion.
Exactly. Close-ups create intimacy and draw the audience into the character's world.
It's like we're getting a glimpse into their soul.
Precisely. Close-ups can also be used to highlight important details or objects that might be missed in a wider shot.
So if we want the audience to pay attention to a specific clue or symbol, a close-up can help with that.
Exactly. It's all about guiding the viewer's attention.
What about those wide shots that show the whole setting?
You mean establishing shots?
Yes.
Yeah.
Those are great for giving the audience a sense of place.
They are. Like if your story takes place in a bustling city, you might start with a wide shot of the cityscape, showing the skyscrapers, the traffic, all the people rushing around.
Yeah, totally. It sets the scene and helps the audience understand where the story is taking place.
Exactly. Establishing shots give context and orient the audience.
It's like you're giving them a map of the world they're about to enter.
Precisely. And you can use them to create a certain mood or atmosphere too.
So a dark, shadowy establishing shot might make you feel a sense of danger or suspense.
Right. But a bright, sunny one could evoke feelings of hope and optimism.
It's all about setting the tone with those visuals.
Absolutely. Now, have you ever noticed how different camera angles can change how a scene feels?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like a low-angle shot can make someone look way more powerful.
Exactly. And a high angle can make them seem smaller or more vulnerable.
What about those shots where the camera's tilted?
Those are called Dutch angles.
Oh, right, Dutch hanging.
Yeah, those can create a sense of unease or disorientation, like something's not quite right.
Yeah, like the world is off kilter.
Precisely. So as you can see, camera angles are a powerful tool for visual storytellers.
Okay, so we've got close-ups, establishing shots, camera angles. What other visual techniques should we be thinking about?
Well, one that's often overlooked is color.
Color. You mean like using warm colors for happiness and cool colors for sadness?
Yes, exactly. Color can evoke all sorts of emotions and even influence our physical responses.
Wow. So it's not just about picking colors that look nice together. It's about using them strategically to add to the story.
Exactly. A well-chosen color palette can create harmony or build tension or even hint at things to come.
That's so cool. What about symbolism? I've noticed that some visual storytellers use symbols to represent something bigger.
Symbolism is a great way to add layers of meaning to a story.
So like a dove could represent peace.
Yeah.
Or a red rose could represent love.
Precisely. A simple object, a color, a gesture can all be packed with symbolic significance. It makes the audience think and interpret the story in their own way.
I love that. It adds so much depth.
It does. It makes the story more thought-provoking and memorable.
Okay, so we've got close-ups, establishing shots, camera angles, color symbolism, anything else?
One last technique I'd like to mention is the use of transitions.
Transitions, you mean like how one scene changes to the next?
Exactly. They're often overlooked, but transitions are super important for shaping how the story flows.
So like a slow fade might show the passage of time.
Right. while a quick cut might create a sense of urgency or even shock.
They can really set the pace and the mood.
They can. They connect ideas, create emotional impact, and can even disorient the audience if that's what you're going for.
Wow, transitions are more powerful than I thought.
They are. They're a subtle but effective tool for any visual storyteller.
Okay, so we've covered a ton when it comes to visual storytelling. Close-ups, color palettes, symbolism transitions. There's just so much to consider.
It's a lot, but it's also what makes visual storytelling so exciting.
It's true. When you master these techniques, you can create digital stories that are not only informative, but also beautiful and impactful.
Absolutely. Now that we've explored the visuals, let's talk about another crucial element, sound design.
Sound design.
Yes. It's often called the invisible art of filmmaking, but it's incredibly important for shaping how the audience experiences the story.
I can see that. Think about how a scary soundtrack can make a thriller so much more intense.
Exactly. Or how a catchy jingle can make a commercial stick in your head.
So sound design includes everything from music and dialogue to sound effects and background noises.
It does. It's about using all of those things to create an immersive soundscape for your story.
Okay, so sound can evoke emotions, convey information, even direct the viewer's attention. This is getting really interesting. What are some of the key things we need to think about when creating the soundscape for our digital story?
Music is a great place to start. Music can set the mood, establish the setting, even hint at what's to come.
So if my story is set in a dark, futuristic world, I might use electronic music with an industrial vibe.
Exactly. But if you're telling a lighthearted romantic comedy, you might choose upbeat pop music.
And music can also make those emotional moments even more powerful, right?
Absolutely. Think of that swelling orchestra music during a really dramatic scene.
Oh yeah, that gets me every time. Now what about dialogue? That's a big part of sound design, especially in stories that are character-driven.
Dialogue is essential. It gives us information, reveals character, and moves the plot forward.
But it's not just about the words themselves, is it? It's also about how the actors deliver those lines.
You're right. Their tone of voice, their pacing, the way they emphasize certain words can convey so much meaning and emotion.
What about accents? Can those be used effectively?
They can. Accents can be a great way to build character and establish setting, but it's important to use them carefully and respectfully.
So no over-the-top or stereotypical accents that could be offensive.
Exactly. Use accents authentically and avoid harmful stereotypes.
Got it. Okay, so we've talked about music and dialogue now. What about sound effects?
Sound effects are those little details that make a scene come alive.
Like the sound of a door creaking open in a spooky movie.
Exactly. Or the sound of a cash register in a store. They create realism, build tension, and can even be funny.
They add so much texture and depth to the scene.
They do. And don't forget about ambient noise.
Ambient noise.
It's the background sound that creates atmosphere and a sense of place.
So like in a forest scene, you might hear birds chirping or leaves crunching.
Exactly. It helps transport the audience to that location and makes it feel more real.
Okay, so we've got music, dialogue, sound effects, and ambient noise. Any tips for using all of this effectively in our digital stories?
One important tip is to use sound sparingly. Too much sound can be overwhelming and actually distract from the story.
So choose sounds that have a purpose and use them strategically.
Exactly. And pay attention to sound quality. Bad sound quality can really ruin an otherwise good story.
So make sure your recordings are clear and your sound effects and music are well produced.
Right. And lastly, don't be afraid to experiment. Try out different sounds or combine them in unexpected ways.
Get creative and have fun with it.
Exactly. Sound design is an art form after all. When you master these elements, you can create a really immersive sonic experience for your audience.
Well, we've covered a ton today. From crafting the story to creating visuals and soundscapes, it's been a whirlwind tour of digital storytelling.
It has. But I think we've given our listeners a great starting point.
I agree. We've explored the creative process, the technical side of things, and even how digital storytelling can be used to make a difference in the world.
And now that we've covered all of that, let's shift gears and talk about some practical considerations.
Practical considerations, like what?
Well, one of the first things you need to think about is your target audience. Who are you making this story for?
So are we talking to kids, adults, a specific community?
Exactly. Knowing your target audience will help you make choices about what to include in your story, the visuals you use, and even the language and tone.
It's like giving someone a gift. You want to make sure it's something they'll appreciate.
Exactly. Understanding your audience is key.
What else should we be thinking about?
Budget. How much money do you have to spend on your project?
That's a good point. But a limited budget doesn't have to limit your creativity, does it?
Not at all. There are lots of ways to create amazing digital stories without breaking the bank.
So get resourceful, use free tools, find creative ways to shoot your footage.
Exactly. And maybe focus on a smaller, more personal story that you can produce well with limited resources.
Okay, budget check. Now what about time? How much time do we have to make this digital story?
Your timeline is important too. It will determine how much time you have for each stage of the process, from planning and shooting to editing and finalizing everything.
So if I'm on a tight deadline, I might need to be more efficient, streamline my workflow, and maybe even ask for help.
Exactly. And you might need to adjust your expectations for the length or complexity of your story.
Okay, so we've got audience, budget, timeline. What else?
One final thing to consider is your distribution strategy.
Yeah.
How are you going to share your story with the world?
Oh, right. Will it go on YouTube or social media? Will I submit it to a film festival?
Exactly. Thinking about this early on helps you make decisions about the technical side of things, like file formats, resolution, aspect ratio.
So it's like planning backwards from the end goal.
Exactly. Knowing where your story is going will help you avoid problems later on.
I'm starting to see how all of these pieces fit together. It's like a puzzle.
It is. And when all the pieces are in place, you'll have a digital story that's ready to be shared with the world.
This has been so insightful. We've covered everything from the creative spark to the technical details to the practical realities of making a digital story.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has. So where do we go from here?
Now it's time for our listeners to take what they've learned and start creating their own stories.
What are some final words of wisdom to inspire them?
Digital storytelling is about more than just making videos. It's about using stories to connect with others, to educate, to inspire, to make a difference.
So it's about finding your voice and sharing it with the world.
Precisely.
Wow, that's powerful. So to all our listeners out there, what story are you waiting to tell?
What message do you want to share?
Pick up your camera, your smartphone, your microphone, and start creating. Your stories matter.
They do. The world needs to hear them.
That's a beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of digital storytelling.
It's been a pleasure.
And to all our listeners, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep telling your stories. We can't wait to see what you create. As we wrap up this deep dive into digital storytelling, what are some of the key takeaways you hope our listeners walk away with?
I really hope they feel inspired and empowered to tell their own stories, Digital storytelling has become such a powerful way to connect with people. And the best part is, it's more accessible than ever. You don't need fancy equipment or years of experience to create something that truly resonates.
Absolutely. We've covered so much today, from writing a script to thinking about visuals and sound to planning and actually producing a digital story.
Yeah.
I can see how it could feel a bit overwhelming at first.
Right. It's a lot to take in. But honestly, I think the most important thing is just to dive in and start experimenting. Don't be afraid to play around with different ideas and find what works for you.
I love that. Just start creating. And, it's okay to make mistakes along the way. That's how we learn and get better.
Exactly. Mistakes are part of the process. Embrace them.
And something we talked about earlier, too, is that digital storytelling isn't just about those polished, finished products. It's about the journey, the process of exploring ideas, making connections, and finding your voice.
It really is. It's about using stories to make sense of the world around us, share our experiences, and build bridges with other people.
So, to our listener out there,
Mhm.
what story are you waiting to tell? What message do you want to share with the world?
Don't wait any longer. Pick up a camera, your phone, a microphone, anything you have, and just start creating. Your story matters, and the world needs to hear it.
That's such a powerful message.
Hmm.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into digital storytelling.
It's been my pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep telling your stories. We can't wait to see what you create.